Okay, looks like we're recording now. So I'll introduce myself for those that I haven't met yet. My name's Becky Wallen. I work for Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife Resources. I have been hunting white-tailed deer since I was 11. Started early during youth season. My dad was taking me out, and we were kind of learning together. But I will say, and Dad just waved. He's sitting beside my mom, who's taken the class this morning. And I will say, Dad was the one that taught me and mentored me, but I was actually with my mother when I shot my first deer. Dad was a firefighter. It was his day to work, his weekend to work. So she said that she would sit with me because it was youth weekend and I really wanted to go. And I don't know that she expected me to actually harvest my first deer at that morning, but I was lucky enough to do so. And I just remember opening the flip phone and calling Dad at the firehouse and saying, "Hey, Dad, what do you do after you harvest a deer?" And he was like, "Oh," and he was so excited. But I did not field dress my first deer. We actually had a neighbor that was nice enough to help me. But after that, I field dressed all of my deer with my dad's help and learning. And then getting into college and going hunting with the guy that I married, now I field dress all the deer. It's kind of my job. So if you learn this skill and you get really good at it, I promise you'll make hunting buddies for life. If you say, "Hey, let me come hunting with you, I promise I'll field dress your deer for you." So it's a good way to get access to different areas to go hunting. So the PowerPoint today, I have a PowerPoint, and I also have some videos that I'm going to be switching back and forth to watch the field dressing portion in little chunks, and we will talk about each step and any questions you might have along the way. I do ask for your patience because I'm going to be playing the video from sharing my screen, but the audio is going to be coming from my phone and my Bluetooth speaker so you can hear it better. So it might be just a little off, but it worked pretty well yesterday. So I'm confident that it will relay pretty well for you guys today too, I hope. So without any further ado, let's get started. I wanted to start the morning with a couple of questions to have you guys answer in the chat. And the first one, I was curious if you have ever field dressed an animal before, with or without help. If you want to just toss that answer in the chat for me. And I'll give you about a minute and a half. So we've got people who have observed, first-year hunters.
Help someone. A rabbit.
Yeah. Always someone there to help. Yeah, it's always great to have somebody that can be your help hold the legs and give advice. Skin several. Okay. Cut the meat off, but not field dressed. Well, you're doing the hard part first there, Lori.
We process our own meat anyway, so he hangs it and I help cut it and stick it in the freezer and grind it.
That's awesome. That's awesome that you have that experience. There's a lot of people that get so intimidated by processing the meat, and once you start cutting, there's really no super right or wrong way, especially if you're going to grind it.
Yeah.
All right. Awesome. Thank you all for answering that question for me. The second question that I would like you to answer for me, if you feel comfortable, what emotions arise for you when you think about processing wild game meat on your own? Satisfaction? Yes, me too. A bit of anxiety and excitement, some accomplishment. Yes. Nervous of doing it wrong. I understand that. You'll learn over time that there's really not a lot of wrong ways to do it. Squeamish? Yeah, I understand, Laura. Excitement and gratitude for the power of nature. Yes, April, that's awesome. Yes. Rather have my fiance do it for me. I don't blame you, Kendra. That's how I got stuck doing it. My husband would rather have me do it. Grind everything. It can be jarring to transition from seeing a live animal to harvested meat. Yes, it can, Kelly, and thanks for sharing that point of view. And it's okay to take time in between to process that, to recognize the process and to appreciate the harvest. Overwhelmed, food, the mess. Yeah, there can be a mess. Love all the family home during the season. Yeah. I love coming home for the season. Thanks for letting me continue to hunt on your land, Mom. Okay, thank you all for answering that. Proud that I'm putting food in the freezer. Thankful. Yeah, Donna, me too. I think the feelings that you just mentioned, Donna, and a couple of other people mentioned, the excitement and the gratitude, is kind of what I tune into as a hunter. And
it's a very, I mean, I don't do the fist pumping. Oh yeah, no. I just killed something, and not for out of protection. But my kid loves deer meat, and we eat it all year long. So very, very thankful, very solemn.
Thank you so much, Donna, for coming off of mute to share that. Yeah, I can relate to that in a lot of ways. And there's no pressure, ladies. When you start hunting, when you harvest an animal, you don't have to take pictures with the animal if that doesn't make you comfortable. I know a lot of people like to share their experiences and their stories, but you can also share the meals that you make and you share with your family and friends. And that's another way of putting hunting out there in a good light for the rest of the world to kind of be introduced to and relate to. Okay, thank you. I just wanted to start the morning off with some discussion and kind of gauge how you all were feeling this morning about the topic. So let's dive into, I'm going to share my screen really quick with my presentation. Here we go. Oh, okay. So some considerations for field dressing before you get started. If you have been hunting with archery equipment or a bow or a crossbow, be extra careful of the broadhead and the blades that are on the broadhead. This is something I learned in the field through experience. I harvested my first year with a crossbow last fall, and a couple of the broadhead blades came off after the arrow had entered the deer, and it's because that's how they were put together. They screw together, and it somehow unscrewed and loosened up just enough for those to come out. And I couldn't find them. I didn't really necessarily want to find them, so just being very extra careful through the field dressing process, and also even when you start skinning and butchering, because those can get lodged in bone or cartilage. So if you are archery hunting with broadheads that come apart, just be extra mindful of that safety precaution. Another thing is use gravity to your advantage. And you can start seeing the yellow words here to follow along with your worksheet if you want to. But I have always hunted in the Knob region. That's where my parents' property is. So didn't really matter which part of the property I was on. I was always on a hill, which actually works to your advantage when you're field dressing. So typically I'll position the animal, the deer, with its butt going downhill or with the open abdomen facing downhill, so that as I'm working, the guts kind of are pulled down by gravity and roll out really nicely. You don't have to have a big hill to use this to your advantage. I've also used a dry creek bed that was just a small slope, but it was just enough to help me out. It is nice to have a helper, but it can easily be done alone. And I'm going to show you a ton of tools today that will help you if you're going to be out there on your own. We'll talk about each one. Before you begin field dressing, before you move your animal, make sure that you have recorded your harvest on your harvest log. That's the law in Kentucky. So the kind of information that you'll be putting on your harvest log is the sex and the county that you harvested it in, and the I just had a brain fart. But anyway, it prompts you. There are blanks on your harvest log to fill in. Super easy, and it's just enough information to record the harvest before you start processing it. So you want to make sure to do that. And your harvest log is actually printed very conveniently right beside your hunting license if you print that out yourself. Or you can write down the information if you know exactly what you need to put down on the harvest log. You can write that on an index card or another piece of paper. Maybe you have a field notebook. The only thing that you have to do if you use a different, not the printed out harvest log that we provide, just make sure that you keep it with you throughout the season. You have to keep your harvest log, your filled out harvest log, with you the whole season. So if you harvest a deer this weekend, you would keep that record all the way through the end of February 2021. Looks like we have some chat. Brent, I cannot see the chat.
That was me, Becky. I shared the link to the harvest log information on our website.
Thank you. Okay, sweet.
You're welcome.
Another suggestion.
Oh, and Donna says, make sure good idea to put it in your pack.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
You have to have a proof. Wait a minute, let me start over. If I've killed one and I have my confirmation number and then I go hunting the next day, do I need that confirmation number in my pocket too?
You're supposed to keep your harvest log with your license all season. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Because I don't have a license. I'm hunting landowner.
Oh, yeah. I would just toss it in your pack and keep it with you.
Last year, I just wrote it in the Fish and Wildlife, the little book thing,
Yeah.
Because it's like, I don't remember what my county number is, and I don't remember the phone, and I just scribbled it down.
Yeah.
But it always lays on my kitchen table until the end of the season.
Well, good. Just as long as you're keeping that record for sure. Brent, did you want to add something there?
Just that it can be digital too. You can put it in your phone. I've got several years worth of harvest logs in a note in my phone, and that's perfectly acceptable as well. Sorry, I'm jumping off.
Thank you, Brent. Yeah, that is something that I hadn't mentioned. Perfectly acceptable. So one more consideration before you start field dressing, make sure after you've filled out your harvest log, move that animal to a shady location, especially early in the season, because it may take you a little bit longer than you expect to finish field dressing, and you really don't want the sun to be heating up that body cavity even more, because what you're trying to accomplish in field dressing is starting that cooling process for the meat. So choose a location where you can work that's going to be shaded and maybe a little bit cooler. And have a hunt plan made before you go hunting. So we usually talk about this in Hunter Ed by telling someone where you're going, telling them how long you're going to stay out, when you're going to be back, but you also want to include in your hunt plan what you're going to be doing with the meat. What is your exit strategy? How are you going to pack it out, especially if you're out on public land? Do you have a buddy that is on standby that you're going to call, come out and help you? Include all of that in your hunt plan when you're making it. So I'm going to show you all of this equipment, but really the basic necessities for field dressing is to have a sharp knife. You don't want a dull knife that's fighting against you. And by the way, just because it came out of the pack, you've just bought it from the store, doesn't mean that it's sharp. So go ahead and have it sharpened or sharpen it yourself. Disposable gloves to protect you and to keep the meat clean. And rope. As long as you have some rope, you can do this completely on your own. And when you're considering rope, there's some different kinds that will work better than others. So I'm going to take my PowerPoint down so you can see me a little bit better and show you some of this stuff. So here's one of the knives I really enjoy using myself for field dressing. You can see it's not very long. It has a deeper belly, and we're going to talk about all this again in a second. But the most important thing for me is that it fits my hand really well. So notice how I'm sticking my finger out here. That's going to help me control the end of the blade. And so if I'm working and I cannot see, I know exactly where I'm putting the knife blade. And here the grip is pretty short and it has a nice hand feel to it. For me, that's really important. You don't need a long knife for field dressing. It's just not necessary. It'll probably get in the way and you might end up nicking something that you didn't necessarily want to. So a good sharp knife. Of course, we talked about disposable gloves. Now here's some rope that I might suggest to you. This is the marine grade rope. So this isn't going to have as much stretch to it as some like paracord or some other nylon ropes. That could possibly work against you, especially if you're trying to drag the deer out and putting a lot of pressure on your rope. So you want to make sure that you've got something that's not going to stretch and actually be more trouble than it's worth. It won't help as much if it has a lot of give to it. And then a gut hook is an option. They can be on your knife. So I've got an example of that here. That is this hooked portion right here. It actually is sharp. And you do have to resharpen it, but basically you're using the gut hook as like a zipper to open up the skin, the skin layer on the animal. So once you start an incision and make a little hole, you can turn that around, hook it, and just open it back up, and it doesn't cut too deep. So you don't have any worry of cutting the organs. These usually have a pretty blunt tip to them. That's not sharp at all. So it won't catch on anything and cut the stomach or anything like that. A tip that I learned the hard way. These can work really well for you, but you have to have the right angle. Make sure when you're using it that you're keeping the back of the knife flush against the body. If you are wrenching up on it like this, then it's not going to cut as well, but it will glide very smoothly if you can keep the angle down close against the body like that. So that's an option. I'm good. Or you can get something like this. This is the mossy oak field dressing knife. And really this is just the gut hook in a different way. It's super lightweight, so you can carry this and the first knife option together, that's totally fine. Same deal. This one helps a little bit with the way that it's designed. You're going to hold it close to the body and just zipper it open just like that. And you're, like I said, you're just cutting the skin with the gut hook. All right. The next thing I'll show you is the bone saw. So here's one example. I really like this bone saw. It's a Gerber, something you could get probably at Dick's or at Cabela's, but it's not very long. It has a great handle on it. It came with a little package, a little sheath here. It doesn't have a sharp end on it at all, but here's what I want you to learn from this example. Check out the teeth on this guy. Notice how big they are. That is what a bone saw should look like. There are other saws out there. There's probably one sitting in your garage right now that you could go grab and use, but it may not be the best option for cutting bone. And it may take you a lot longer. It may take a lot more effort. So get a bone saw that has really good teeth on it. And it's actually got, I don't know what the word is for it, but the teeth are made in such a way that it cuts both directions. So eliminating the effort on your part too. You're going to use this maybe if you choose to. It's not a necessary piece of equipment. To open up the sternum, and you can also use it to open up the pelvic bone, which we'll see in our videos a little bit later. And then we've got the rib spreader. So I'm going to pull my kit out here. This is the Outdoor Edge Wild Pack. I really like this. I have one for myself. It comes with knives, 3 different knives that you'll need: the fillet knife, the gutting knife with the gut hook, and this is, they call it a caping knife. You can also, I actually always grab this one for field dressing because it's shorter than this one is, even for me. So, and then they've got their own version of the bone saw. This is a sharpener for quick field sharpening. You just insert the blade there and sharpen it up real quick. It's always great to have one of these options. A lot of kits have their sharpener stuck in there for you. And then the rib spreader. So this is something you're going to want to have if you're working alone. It's not heavy. It's very compact. It's going to be your best friend. If you're going to cut the sternum open, you just unfold this guy. It locks in like that. And then you place it with the rib cage on either side. So it's going to have one half of the rib cage over here after you cut it, the other half over here, and it's going to hold it open so that you can see what you're doing really well. And it'll open up that whole chest cavity so you can cut the esophagus. You can take the heart out if you want. And then you can pull, once you've got the diaphragm cut, you can just easily pull everything else out. But this is going to hold the chest cavity open for you. I don't know if you can buy these on their own. Probably. You can buy anything nowadays. But they usually come in a kit. So really handy. If you're going to buy a kit, I would almost make sure that it had one of these, really. All right. The butt out big game dressing tool is exactly what it sounds like. I don't have an example, but I think Brent can throw a link on the chat for us if you want to look at one. Basically, it's a piece of, thank you, Brent. It's a piece of plastic. It has a handle on one end. It does have a shield so that you don't insert it too deep. And the very front of it is kind of shaped like a backwards cone with little prongs. You insert it into the anus, and then when you pull it out, the prongs have caught the large intestine. They pull it out just far enough that you can tie the large intestine off in front of the tool. You give it a little tie with string or a zip, not a zip tie, but I guess you could. Anywho, the point is that it helps you pull some of that large intestine out of the animal just far enough to tie it off, remove the tool, and then you can cut around the anus and it will easily pull back through the cavity of the deer once you get to that point. Are there any brands or materials?
I don't know if it's helpful, but
thank you. Yes, Kendra, coming in clutch. That is exactly what it is. So you can see those little points. They grab the intestines and pull it out for you. Thank you so much.
I feel like Kendra's going to go wash her hands now.
Maybe.
I actually pulled that out the other day from storage, so I know it's clean.
So Kelly asked if there was equipment that I've field tested that I don't recommend, maybe because they were lower quality or didn't work as well. Yes, for sure there is. I'm trying to think. Okay, here's a good example that I was going to cover anyway. Another option for splitting the chest, the sternum, is to use a hatchet. So here's my hatchet. It's not very big. It is a good option, this little SOG hatchet, if you are interested. So it turns out that the chest has more bounce, for lack of a better word. And when you're using a hatchet and applying force to the chest, to the sternum that way, it felt like every hit, the tool was bouncing back out instead of cutting like I needed it to. It's hard to get a good angle on it, and it just felt really unsafe for me. Some people do use the hatchet to split the sternum and the pelvic bone. I personally don't recommend the hatchet necessarily for a beginner. I'd rather use the saw. It feels like I have way more control over it, and it's kind of, I don't know, I think it's faster. I'm just not as confident swinging the hatchet. And as far as other stuff goes, I already talked about the rope types. I've learned that the hard way. I also tried to use a hand winch once to pull a deer up a steep hill. The combination of there's no lift to pick the body up to like go over sticks and rocks and stuff, that all worked against me. But also the rope I was using was stretchy. That just didn't wind up working very well. Not to say it couldn't, but you're definitely going to need a partner if you're going to try and use a come along that can like pick the deer up over logs and things. And it wound up taking a lot more time than I had anticipated. Other than that, just some knives. I don't know how many other people have a knife collection. So some of my knives just did not stay. They didn't hold an edge, and it was horrible. So yeah, those are the things that come to mind directly. That's a super great question. Thanks, Kel. Last couple of things on here on our list. We've got the game bags. That's what these are. Or you can use clean pillowcases if you're going to quarter out your animal and pack it out in bags. The reason you want to do this is to keep the meat clean, keep bugs off of it, keep dirt off of it. And these they're really, really thin, and they allow the meat to start cooling while you're packing it out. So these are a good option, especially if you're going to be hunting large game that you'd never drag out like an elk. You want to take some game bags. Plastic gallon bags, I put that on the list because I like to keep the deer heart, and I've been known to keep the liver to eat. And let me tell you, don't knot it till you try it, because the heart has zero gaminess. It's actually super easy to clean it up so that you can cook it. I learned by watching one YouTube video. And then it tastes like, the texture of it is like a super great cut of beef, like a really tender cut of beef. Yes. Excellent, Donna. Got your bags there. So that's why I take bags with me, because I want to save those organs sometimes. And a good tarp could be a great barrier. Oh, Carrie's had the heart too. Excellent. The tarp can be a great barrier between the ground and your animal. You can lay the meat on there. If it's a clean tarp, don't grab the tarp that has motor oil on it from the garage. Get a clean one. And then the Gut Daddy. So I've got the Gut Daddy set up. I'm going to pick it up to show you guys. So this is another piece of equipment that I recommend almost. I've not used it by myself, but it is geared towards the solo hunter. Woo. So you can see here, it just folds open and the back of the animal lays down the middle. And it doesn't matter whether it's the front legs or the back legs. If it was me, I'd probably use the front legs up here. And they just slip into, get to where you guys can see, there's these little chain loops on these holes here. And you put the feet through, one on each side. The animal's laying on its back. And this is pretty much sets you up to the optimal position to field dress by yourself. Because now you've eliminated needing a buddy to hold the deer for you, and you're not fighting it. But I will say these are geared more towards people that go out hunting out west where there's no trees. In Kentucky, we don't seem to have a shortage of trees, so you could easily do the same thing that this is doing by tying the legs off to a couple of trees. And then it's actually pretty compact, and it's not really too heavy either. So these pop out, flip it over, toss them in, close it up, ready to go. Not too big, it's not too heavy. I probably wouldn't pack it with me on the hunt. This would be something I left in my truck and then went back to get after I harvested the animal. So just another tool out there that's kind of nifty for you guys. The last thing is a headlamp. So that can help whether it's light or dark. And also, if it does get dark, you want to be able to see what you're doing with your knife. So headlamp or a lamp that clicks to your hat bill is almost a necessity if you're going to be out there hunting, because it gets dark faster than you think it does. All right, so the skinning knife, just to revisit that really quick, it is, remember we talked about it's a short, stiff knife. This thing has a really thick backbone on it. You can tell there. So it's a stiff knife, it's short, make sure it fits your hand. The blade does not need to be super long. It has a fat belly on it. So what that really does, it allows you more surface area when you're cutting. So you're going to cut more with less strokes.
What brand is that, Becky?
This is actually a buck knife. This one here. I don't know what the name of the knife is, but it's a buck. And a buck, if you know some knives, it's a pretty good brand. Donna's got hers there. Looks like you got a folding knife. Is that replaceable blade?
Yes.
Nice.
And it's a lot smaller because I got to get all up inside there, and I nicked my fingers, I bet you 10 times last year.
Oh.
Because I didn't think about cutting that sternum like you were saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, I went to my shooter supply here in Paducah, and them guys just are great. They help me with my bow. You know, I go in, it's like, dudes, I got to have something I can cut it. They hook me up.
Good. Awesome. Okay. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, the replaceable blades are another good option. I don't have one yet. I kind of do want one. It's on my Christmas list. So working up to that. Another thing about your skinning knife, your knife that you're going to be using for field dressing, If you get one that's high carbon steel, it's going to hold the edge better on the blade, and it can be sharper than other metals. So high carbon steel is what you're aiming for. If you're using a folding knife like Donna, hers, I did see that it does, make sure that it has a locking mechanism on it. You do not want to be out there and not be able to see what's going on and the knife fold in on your fingers. Bad news. Make sure that it locks if you're going to have a folding knife. Also, you're going to have to clean all of the folding mechanisms and oil them to keep them in tip-top shape. So let's jump back over to the, well, we'll do that in just a second. No, we can do it now. Let's jump back over to the PowerPoint because I want you guys to be able to catch up on your notes here while I finish up this slide. Okay, so there's your notes if you're following along. Last couple things here. Don't use your field dressing knife to chop or cut the rib cage because it's really not made for that. You're gonna compromise the edge on your blade, and then everything else that you work on after that is gonna be super hard. So just choose a different tool if you're gonna cut the rib cage. Choose the saw. If you're comfortable with a hatchet, you can use that too. Practicing on small game can definitely help improve your skills and make you more confident before you transfer over to big game. And a freshly harvested animal is way easier to process, both field dressing and processing the meat than something that has been setting for a while. And I'm going to talk more about bloat in just a second, but besides the fact that you want to field dress your animal as soon as you can to preserve the meat, to avoid meat spoilage, it's also just easier. So yes, you do want to wait maybe up to an hour if you weren't confident on your shot to let the animal pass. But as soon as you can start tracking, do it, and then find that animal as fast as you can, and then get to work after you fill out your harvest log. All right. I think everybody's got the notes. Tell me to go back if you need me to. Let's talk a little bit about the vital organs really quick. So you've got the heart, the lungs, and the liver, and then you've got the non-vital organs, the stomach, the intestines, the reproductive organs, kidneys, etc. So my graphic will change here to remove all the non-vital organs, and that's what you're left with, the heart and the lungs. They don't have the liver in this picture, but a liver, if you hit the liver, you've more than likely hit the lungs, and you've still got a good animal, a good shot on your animal. So going back to bloat, this you can use at your next dinner party. All these fun tips or topics right here. So deer and other big game like elk and moose and bison are a part of the ruminant family. And if you have cows, they are also part of the ruminant family. So what that means is that they have a foregut. They have this gut in front of their regular stomach that helps them process and digest plant cells more efficiently. And so what's going on, they've got all these little microbes in there in the chambers of the stomach before the true stomach that are working to break down these plant materials. And while they're doing that, they're creating a gas. And so a ruminant actually has to always be in a position that they can let the gas out. So they're constantly burping. And when you harvest an animal, that process does not stop. So the gas immediately continues. I mean, it never skips a beat. It continues to build in the foregut, in the stomach, and it starts expanding the stomach. It starts putting pressure on the body cavity. And that can be a little difficult. That can make it pretty difficult when you start field dressing if it's been sitting for a while. So there's your fun, nerdy deer facts for the day, and that's why the stomach expands. So moving on, we're going to talk about shot placement. And the reason I talk about shot placement so much today is because if you don't make a good shot, field dressing and processing of the animal is just going to be that much harder. So I did want to take time talking about this. The best shot angle is broadside on your animal. That exposes all of the vital organs that we talked about, the heart and the lungs, and you're also you've got the biggest surface area for those organs. So that's why we talk about a broadside shot. That's what the picture is representing here. And with the little target at where you would like to aim. Also the silhouette of a broadside animal, if it's like low light at all, is a little bit easier to help you visualize where those vital organs are. A couple other shot angles that we're talk about really quick is quartering towards, quartering away, straight on, and facing away. And I didn't want to just throw these out there. I do want to show you pictures, because when I started hunting, this was talked about, but it was really hard for me to visualize what that looked like in the field. So I've got some examples for you. So let's talk about good shot versus bad shot. This is a quartering away deer. Go ahead and tell me in the chat if you think this is a good shot, like you would take, or a bad shot and you would not take the shot. How's it looking, Brent?
Mostly no's at the minute.
Okay.
All no's at the moment.
Okay. Let's talk about that. Awesome. Okay. So,
Oh, Kelly's been paying attention to you in the past, apparently.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, I can't see the comment, so.
Only if you catch in mid-stride is her comment.
Ooh. I like that.
You talk about this stuff at like Christmas and stuff, don't you?
Yeah.
That's our normal dinner conversations.
Okay, so let's talk about it. If you felt like this wasn't a good shot and you wouldn't take it, right on. I mean, the most important thing is to take shots that you're comfortable with, right? So that's where you start. After that, if you can visualize where the vital organs are on the steer, for me, bow, archery equipment, or firearms equipment, this is a shot that I may consider taking. And if I did, I would place it right there on the body, right behind that shoulder that he's stepping forward with. But something else about this deer that some of you may have noticed is he's on high alert. His tail's up, his ears are back. He's like looking over his shoulder. He probably has already saw me, or the hunter, or something else has spooked him. And I'm more than likely am not going to take a shot at a deer that's already this wigged out. I'm going to wait either until it circles back and is calm, or until the next deer comes along, because especially if I'm using archery equipment, he can jump at hear the string before the arrow ever gets to him, and it will throw your shot off. And I just usually don't chance that. So good answers all the way around. So now we've got this broadside shot, and I'm curious to know, good shot or bad shot? What do you think?
I'm seeing lots of goods.
Okay. All right, let's talk about that some more. So broadside.
Jennifer says, well, okay, what you're going to say. Go ahead.
Okay. She's probably right on. I wish I could see the chat as they came in. Sorry, folks. But Brent's helping me out. So broadside is the shot that we want to take, right? But look how far back his shoulder is, the shoulder that's facing us. What he's done when he's taking that step and pushing that shoulder back is pretty much covering all of the vital organs. So we're going to wait until he takes a couple more steps and looks more like this. That front shoulder, he's reaching out, he's completely exposed all of the vital organs, and we'll be able to take a clean shot with our best possible chance of hitting the vital organs here. So even if it is a broadside shot, you might still have to wait a second for the most excellent opportunity at the vitals. All right, so this is a quartering towards. It's a pretty interesting angle on this doe. And here's where I'm going to talk about the difference that might come into play if you're using archery versus a firearm. For me, if I was super confident with my bow or my crossbow, I would take this shot here on this doe, and it would be a good, clean heart shot right in front of the shoulder blade, so it would miss that bone. If it was firearm season and I didn't have to worry about working around the shoulder, I would probably take this shot on this doe. Let me know if you have any questions about that one, but we're going to move on. So this guy, I'm interested to know your opinion here. Good shot or bad shot?
So far, Beth is the only one that wants to venture a guess.
Okay. What does Beth think?
Well, actually, now people are back and forth. We're getting some comments. We got like some people are saying it's good. Some people say wait. Some people aren't sure.
Okay, fair enough.
So, yes.
So on this guy, if you took a shot at the vitals, notice how his shoulders kind of wrenched out forward and how his back end is kind of curving around. He's more or less facing us head on. If you took a shot at the vitals, the heart and the lungs, it is pretty likely that your shot would travel through and compromise the non-vital organs, the stomach and the intestines, which is going to make a pretty big mess of the animal. You have a higher chance of ruining your meat if you are shooting through the organs to get through the non-vital organs to get to the vital organs. Someone yesterday mentioned taking a neck shot or head shot. It's just not something I teach to new hunters because you got to know those animals are constantly on alert. They're constantly looking around. They're constantly going down to feed and coming back up. So I don't recommend the smaller moving target over the large vitals area. So this guy, we will either pass on him or wait till he turns broadside for us. Now, the last one, the quartering away angle that I wanted to talk about, I think you can see my cursor. Hold on. You could. Yesterday, you could see it. All right. So just take a look at his front shoulder. Notice how his chest, his stomach is kind of bulging out, covering that shoulder up. It is highly likely that you would wind up shooting through his stomach to get to his organs again, just like we talked about. And if he was a moose or an elk, you most definitely would wind up shooting his stomach before you ever reached the heart or the lungs. So if it's quartering away at a really steep angle like this, wait till he takes another step. This is a quartering away angle that I would definitely take the shot on. And I would actually place it right there for archery or firearms, right in that pocket behind his shoulder, and make a good clean shot on him. All right. So what are the three main factors that contribute to meat spoilage? I'm curious to know who did their homework.
as part of this, your sister had a question earlier too. So go ahead and finish this part, but then it's relevant to this. So, sorry.
Okay. Perfect. Check the time here, and we're good until 10, right?
Correct.
Okay.
So, yeah,
so we're gonna have to.
Nothing.
Okay. Does anybody have any guesses for meat spoilage? The 3 main contributing factors.
I see heat. I see heat, dirt / bacteria. I see heat, sun, time. Last one was your mama.
Okay. Yeah. Everybody's pretty close to being right on track. What I'm looking for here is heat, dirt, and moisture are the 3 main contributing factors to meat spoilage. And so do we want to hit that question now, Brent, or keep going?
She wanted to know if adrenaline from the deer would affect the flavor of the deer, or I assume increase the time in which it would spoil.
Okay.
If I'm reading the question right, I might be reading it wrong, Kelly, and I apologize if I'm butchering it.
She's nodding her head there, yeah. So that's an excellent question. There is actually a lot of articles that you can read about that kind of stuff and about aging the deer to allow some of that to work out of the meat, or brining the meat to pull some of that out, how it can affect the flavor. I would say, in my experience, what affects the flavor more is how you're cooking it, but even before that, how well you are trimming the meat, because deer fat is gross. You do not want to eat deer fat. And also they have a lot of sinew. They have a lot of this white, opaque, tough layer on top of the muscles that kind of encase some of the muscles. So all of that has to be trimmed off for it to be what I consider edible, right? So that, I think, contributes more towards the flavor. Also, it is commonly talked about that where the deer comes from affects, and what it's been eating affects how it tastes. So you never know. Whatever he's getting into, corn versus clover, I've never been able to compare side by side, but I've heard a story about a deer that was eating cow feed. He would walk up to the trough when the farmer fed his cows, and cow feed actually has some kind of fish product in it. And so I heard that the deer meat wound up having some kind of weird fish undertone. That's just a cool story that I've heard. I don't know that it's fact, but it
what
did
about
come
bucks versus does and age?
Great question. Okay, so if I was going to pinpoint the best tasting deer, it would be a younger deer, first of all, and it would be a deer that was probably a doe is what I would go for, a younger doe. And when I say younger, I'm thinking anywhere 2 years and under is going to be what I go for the best tasting. I think they all taste good, but I have noticed I have eaten an older buck that we harvested in rut, and he did, I would say, taste more like a deer than anything else. I'll put it that way. And when I mean older, in certain areas of the state, 3.5 and up is going to be an older deer, because there's so many of them. They get harvested so frequently because the bag limits are a little bit more liberal. So if you have a 3.5-year-old deer, you've actually got a decent aged deer in some zones.
Do you think you can quickly summarize how to age a deer on the hoof, or do you want me to find something and share it in the chat?
I think it might be best to share something.
Okay. Yep.
I will say this. The antler size and the body size, well, the antler size is not a good estimate. It all depends on nutrition in that area. So that's not a good estimate. If you got a massive buck, he could really only be 2, 3.5 years old. He may not be a lot. I've heard, it's got to be like 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 years old. Probably not, because at 7, if they've lived that long, they've peaked, and then just like on humans, things start to not look as beautiful as they used to. So they antlers mass actually starts going down at that point. All right, so I really want to dive into the actual field dressing part. So I'm going to jump past meat spoilage, but I promise that all of this material will be sent to you directly after the class. And the main things I was reiterating was heat, dirt, and moisture being the main contributing factors to meat spoilage. So you want to do everything you can to keep it clean, keep it cool, get it cool as fast as you can, and don't flush the body with excess water. It's not necessary unless you've really got some dirt or if you punctured the stomach and you need to clean an area. And pat it dry before you package it. So you don't want excess moisture on the meat. And this just talks about some packaging tips. It's pretty straightforward. So field dressing. The first thing you're going to do is you either use your butt out tool or separate the rectum from the fatty tissue that holds it in place, and tie the anus closed so that once you open up the cavity, you can pull it through with all of the rest of the intestines. A pro tip here, you may opt to use a smaller, more slender and pointy knife, for this portion that you don't necessarily use for the rest of the processing. It's not necessary, but it can help because the space around the rectum that you're cutting is pretty small, and a smaller knife with a pointy tip will probably work just a little bit better. So I'm going to switch over to our YouTube video that demonstrates this.
Powering on. Welcome to Alltech Lansing.
Let me get our audio together. All right.
So when you start field dressing, there's 2 ways to do it. You can either put them right down, or you can ream out what we call ream and core, so that we can pull it back through. And that's often the easiest way if you're in the field and don't have a lot of tools. Just take a knife and cut around the anus. Take that loose skin off. See that? Go right around it. Grab in and pull it out so that it stretches. It makes it easier. And then this loose tissue in here is still attached. You got to loosen all that fatty stuff. Come right around it entirely so that it'll pull through from the inside. Out there, you can feel it, a turtle that's going. There it is. So that should be ready to go.
There we go. Okay, questions about the reaming and coring portion of beginning to field dress? So you can just come off mute and ask.
When you say, excuse me, when you say tie it off, do you literally mean like pull it out and make a knot?
Yep. Well, with something, with a string or a zip tie or a twist bread tie or something like that, you're not going to actually tie the large intestine. You're going to close it with a string or something of that nature. But yes. actually tying it closed. Other questions? Okay, so the next step is going to be splitting. And so your field guide that I gave you on the resource website actually recommends starting from the bottom, which is what that graphic is with the two hands. They just made their incision by the between the legs, and they're starting from the bottom and working their way up. I like to start from the top of the sternum and work my way down. And at this point, I'm not cutting open, I'm not sawing open the sternum. I'm just splitting the all the layers of the skin and the hide. And the reason I start up here is because it's got the sternum bone that keeps me from cutting too deep and initially. So that's why I recommend starting at the top, because you can kind of get a feel for how deep you need to cut before you get to the stomach area, and you don't want to cut too deep and accidentally nick things. So for beginners, try starting up top, make your little incision. You're going to be working the knife just like the graphic shows. You're going to reach under with your hand. They usually recommend splitting, your two fingers and resting your knife right in between and working your way up, using this hand to push the organs into the body cavity and away from the knife blade. And the knife blade is pointed up towards the sky, and you're cutting from the inside out, always. That way you're not cutting hairs. Hair is considered dirt, so what you don't want to do is have a bunch of hair on your meat and in the body cavity. So always cut from the inside out, and you're going to see that on this next little clip that we've got. I'm going to show you right here.
Now, lots of guys, when they field dress an animal, they start at the bottom and cut up. But I was taught years ago from an old German fella that if you cut across those hairs, they're all going to come out of the belly. And you can see how the hairs run here. So normally you find which direction they run and cut with it. You have a whole lot less hair in it. So again, you take the sharp part of your knife, hold the skin. You don't have to go deep right into it.
Sorry, I forgot to mention that it likes to buffer. It shouldn't take too long to catch back up. Sorry about that. So he's starting at the top, and he mentioned cutting with the hairs instead of cross-cutting across them and basically shaving the hide and releasing all these little hair fragments into the chest cavity. So here we go.
Just run it. The trick here is to cut from the skin side up. See how I work my knife under there and pull it up? That way, you look closely, there's actually no loose hair coming out of that elk. There'll be no hair in here. So it helps to keep them a lot cleaner. Just nice and slow, sharp knife. Under, cut up, under, cut up, under, cut up. And we're starting to gear up to, we know our tag is on the right-hand side here. So we're going to want to leave the evidence of sex on the right-hand side. We're just going to come around it. Now, these bulls, if they were rutting, they'd probably be pretty smelly. I'd actually cut this whole chest plate off and throw it out. No, not yet. He's not. I think they're just starting to rut. But we want to take this cut all the way down to the bottom end. Again, we're still cutting width. See how those hairs are growing in that direction? And when we cut through, there's no loose hairs falling out, which actually helps to keep it clean when you go to butcher it. So under the skin, pull up, so you're cutting from the skin side up, under the skin, up, under, up, So it's a little longer process, but it sure keeps them clean. And you go right down to the anus. There it is all the way through.
All right. So a couple of things that I haven't talked about yet that he mentioned. He talked about leaving evidence of the sex of the animal. You do have to do that in Kentucky, and Donna and I talked about that yesterday. Donna, you said you hunt on your own property. This is only a concern, really, if you're transporting. So what you don't want to do, and what I've actually seen when I worked at a processor last year, is somebody thought they were doing the processor a favor, and they brought the deer in without the head and no skin. It was completely skinned and no head. So they were trying to do a favor for the processor and make their lives easier, but actually it was illegal transporting that deer without proof of what it was. So you want to either leave the head or leave the genitals or the milk sac, or just don't skin it at all if you're transporting your animal. Wait to skin it until you get where you're gonna be.
That is true. You would be surprised. I worked at the Hughes Market for many, many years during deer season, and the people who would roll in and not have anything prepared, didn't have it checked in, or was couldn't prove that they had killed that it was legal.
Yes, and that's what our law enforcement officers are going to be concerned with. Who harvested it? When was it harvested? You got to have all your stuff in line there. And they got to know, was it a buck or a doe?
Yes.
Because the tags are different in Kentucky. So here, really quick, the next step, and he talked about removing some of the cape on the belly. He talked about the elk not necessarily being in rut yet. So elk are really nasty, and they spray pee all over their underside, and then they roll in mud. And that's what they do when they're rutting because they think it smells good. But it's pretty gross, and deer do not do that. So you don't necessarily have to worry about removing part of the cape on a deer. But just a quick tip here, I do like to, at this point, open up the skin around the belly. So I have not cut into the membrane that opens up the entire abdomen yet. I've just cut the hide, and what I like to do is kind of skin that hide around the belly away a little bit, just to give myself a little bit more room to work. When you're skinning, you want to put a little bit of tension on the skin, pull up away, and you can see on my graphic here, pulling the skin up, that gives you a very clear line of where the skin and the muscle are different, and you just run your blade right along that line. It basically takes no pressure at all, and you skin. That's how you skin, just really light cuts.
Oh my gosh, is that muscle as in like the lives in the river, or muscle like I got a muscle?
Oh, now I don't know. What did I do? Did I put
Typo.
You know what I meant.
I know what you meant.
Thanks, Donna.
Can't
Keeping
help
me
it.
honest.
Second time I've watched the
typesetter.
presentation, I didn't catch it either, Becky. I just, oh yeah, sure, muscle.
I like mussels that live in the river too. We can stop and talk about them for a second. They're pretty awesome. Okay. Now he's gonna continue splitting open the cavity here. Hang on.
Now, if you want, you can actually open this up and come down along the penis, right to the pelvic. Pelvis is right here, it's a piece of bone, and some people like to split that with a saw, and you can lift all of that out. That's also a very easy way to do it. But if you didn't have a saw or a hatchet, the ream and core is also a very good way. Just going to loosen some of this and bring it to one side. Again, don't cut through the hair. Careful what you're doing. See how clean that all stays? There's not any hair in there at all yet. Cut from the skin side always with your knife. Nice and clean. We're not going to open them up real far because if we have to drag them through any brush or something, he's going to get dirty. So we'll do a lot of that back at camp. On the brisket here, again, you can open it right with the brisket bone. And then where the bone ends, you can feel it get soft. That's over the paunch or the stomach. That's where you can use a gut hook to get in there, but we don't have one today. So the old-fashioned way is to just start a little hole like I did. Get your fingers underneath. Just run your blade up between your fingers so that you don't cut into any of that stomach. And that's the easiest way to actually open them up without causing a mess. Get your hands in there and push it down. Cut from underneath, cut up. Don't stick your knife in there and start pushing because it won't work. You'll cut something you don't want to. Sometimes it's hard if you've been sitting around. This guy was sitting ruminating, so his stomach is swollen up. It's a little bit tougher to do. Right to the back.
All right, questions there?
All the way.
All right. If you have questions, you can just come off of mute and ask. If not, I'm going to move on to the next video here. Okay, so now he's going to start removing the organs. And he does a really good job of trying to show you where the diaphragm is. And the diaphragm is the layer of muscle that separates what's in the chest cavity and everything from the liver down that's not in the chest cavity. So you do actually have to cut that all the way around. I typically start at the top, at the sternum, and work my way around the chest cavity to the backbone on one side, and then I'll go and kind of rotate the organs and go from the other side and meet my cut against the backbone on the other side. That's how I typically trim that diaphragm out. And then you'll see that he is reaching way in behind the stomach, behind all the rest of the organs, cutting along the spine. All he's doing is trimming all of the fat muscles, all of that connective tissue that holds the stomach and the intestines up against the spinal column. So that's just fat, and he's just kind of trimming that away.
All the way. You can see we're right down into the pelvis here, where we started our cut. Right there. So you're all the way through. And if we reamed them out all the way, we'll be able to pull that right through and out to the side. And I'm going to come back up to the diaphragm here and just open it up. Give it some breathing space is basically what you're looking for. So that you can get in there and get under that stomach and pull on it a bit. Sometimes you can actually roll it out to the side. So that's all right. Like that. So there's the brisket there. If I had a saw, I would just saw that open right now. Pull this out a bit and find the diaphragm. Diaphragm is right now. It's right there. See inside there? That membrane that's holding the liver on this side with the stomach is the diaphragm. So because there's a nice wide opening there, open it right up. Go back to the other side. some of it's by feel, which isn't always great if you've never done this before. Lots of blood in there. I shot him right through the lungs, top of the heart probably, the way he's bedded. It's the fat that holds on the back of the kidneys. Okay.
Okay. Questions at this point? I saw some things pop up in the chat. I don't know if they were questions. You can just come out and ask me.
Go for it, Cindy. Repeat your question out loud. It was a good question.
I just asked for the average time it would take two people to go from start to finish on this.
That's a great question, Cindy. I think it just depends on experience level.
And I know if you first start, it'd probably take me 3 hours. But, once you've done it a few times, what is the average time?
If everything went smoothly, I would give myself 20, 30 minutes to get it done. I don't like to work super fast because I'm careful that I'm not, cutting something I'm not supposed to.
Right.
And there is a little bit of tugging involved, and it feels like every fall, that first animal is, you're like, okay, which step was next again? Now which part? Okay. But yeah, maybe 30 minutes. Good question.
Okay.
All right. Any more questions?
I'm laughing at something on the chat.
Laura just said that the reminds her of the scene in Star Wars where Han Solo has to put Luke inside of his tauntaun.
Oh. Nice. Yes. All right. I believe in this very short segment here, he is cutting either the sternum or the pelvic bone with the saw. So let's go ahead with that.
But I'll show you also how to do it with the saw. And then split step. I mean, this is by far the easiest way to do it. You can even split it with a hatchet. And you can see this elk's been feeding well, so it's the actual fat that's holding this in there for him. And your knife blade, mine came in about that far, and that's where I loosened it. But there's still some fat in here, so we'll just loosen that off through the pelvis. And lift it right out. So there it is. So that part's done.
Yeah. Any questions about that? Okay. Pretty straightforward. He used the saw. Let's keep going here.
We've got most of the stomach out here. And what we'll do is we'll roll them up and show you how to saw the brisket open. All right. You can see that stomach's already out most of the way. And if you had two people to work on this, you could just cut that diaphragm out. But this actually splits very easily. There it is. It's nice that I have some help today. I got some guys pulling them open. You can see here's the lungs. Here's the heart on the bottom. You basically have to loosen all this stuff holding it in. And if we go all the way up to the esophagus, we can cut it off and use it as a handle to pull things back out. There it is. What I like to do is just poke a finger hole in it. So you can get a hold of it and pull. Once again, most of that tissue is just going to have some some fat on the back side of it. Just loosen that off. Normally release it from out. There's the rest of the stomach out. And here's the rest of his diaphragm. So if we continue to cut up the diaphragm, right there, there's part of the liver I opened up. Here's the rest of the diaphragm there. It should just all roll right out. There it is, feel good. Of course, you go back in the small of the back here, and that's where the kidneys sit. Here's one of the kidneys. Blood out the right. Nice and clean. Really feel good.
All right. So that's it. That's all there is to it. Questions after we just saw the rest of that. I will say that you can either push the rest of the blood and stuff out the back like he did, or you can flip the animal over and pull the legs out, so it's like kind of doing the spread eagle thing with the chest down, that open cavity down, to let the rest of the blood and stuff drain out.
Are there any regulations on what you can and can't do with those guts at that point?
Awesome question. So, no. And when you're hunting on public land in Kentucky, all you have to do is move whatever you're leaving behind, whether you've quartered the deer out or the elk out and you're leaving like the skeleton and everything, or just the gut pile. All you have to do is make sure that it is moved out of public view. So you don't want to leave it right on the road or right on a trail that's somebody that's not a hunter is going to come up and see it. It just has to be out of reasonable view for the public. Good question. But yeah, you can use as much or as little of that as you want.
And if you're not using lead, you don't have to worry about scavengers getting lead poisoning from the gut pile, right, Becky?
You're right, Brent. Yes, you can indeed find ammunition that does not have lead in it. And if you're interested in learning more about lead shot in your game meat, there's some pretty cool research being done. And I would recommend you check some of that out if you want to. It's pretty cool stuff. Any other questions before we go back to our PowerPoint for the last comment here? All right. Let me just jump ahead here. Okay, so the last couple things to consider. We already talked about spreading open the cavity and letting blood drain out that way. We talked about what to do on public land. If you're hunting on private land that's not your own, make sure you ask the landowner what they want you to do with the gut pile, where they want you to leave it. They may ask you to bury it, so just have that discussion before you go hunting. But if there are questions about how long it's going to last, how long it's going to lay there, is it going to stink? I promise it's not going to last more than a couple hours, and it definitely will not last overnight. There are so many other animals out there that put to good use what you leave behind. So the gut pile isn't going to be there after one night. When you're dragging out the animal, make sure that you're not collecting dirt and leaves in the open cavity. I said you can open up the cavity and lay the animal down to let blood drain out, but once you're done, make sure you flip it back over onto its side or its back where the hide still is and drag it out with the hide in that cavity closed, because I have seen people collect dirt and leaves inside the cavity, and basically the meat at that point has to be trimmed so very much that you just wind up with a lot of waste. And you can choose to save the heart, the liver, and the kidneys for yourself if you like to eat any of that. I will say the liver tastes like liver. If you like chicken liver, you'll probably like deer liver. And it's pretty easy to cook. Heart, same way. I already advocated for that. I've never eaten the kidneys. I am interested in it if anybody else has. Or you can save some of that kind of stuff to dry out and make really awesome dog treats for your pups. And that's where your gallon bags come in handy. So I've got some additional resources here, along with the videos that I showed today that I'll be sending to you. I suggest that you take time to view all of these because they all offer a little bit more information in a couple different areas. And it's good to see the same thing from different angles. I'll say that the Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife DIY deer processing is a pretty good one, but it's pretty long. I think it's about an hour, and that talks about processing all the way down to packaging the meat. And the very first one, Kentucky Afield TV Deer Field Dressing Instructions, that's actually what I used to learn. I had it on a DVD and I just played it over and over and over, and that's how I learned. Besides having, I did have my dad help me, but the deer processing part, when I started processing deer on my own, I was in college, and we had the deer hanging up in the barn, and we would come in, play a couple seconds of the video, pause it, run outside, make a few cuts, come back in, play some more video, run outside, make a few cuts. That's how I learned how to do it. So, and if you have any follow-up questions after the class, please contact me. Reach out to me, join our legacy group, and ask questions there. There's so many mentors there, so many good hunters, and other people like you that are trying to learn. So don't be afraid to ask questions there. And I just appreciate everyone joining the class. I'm going to get out of here so I can see the chat here.
We're making bad Star Wars dad jokes right now.
Yeah. Sorry.
I love it. Any other questions? If not, you're totally free to go. I think we ran about 3 minutes over, but
question. So like if we're like field dressing the deer, I don't have like a pickup truck or a big vehicle to just like haul a whole thing back to my car and like throw it in the back. So would I just need to quarter it at that point and put it in a cooler, or what do other people do in that?
Great question. Quartering it is a good option, especially if, it's a little bit faster. If it's a warm day, you can get the quarters cooling and then get that back home to start breaking it down even smaller. You can also totally pull the meat completely off the bone and leave the whole skeleton behind. Brent, have you done that before? Or was that Jamie that used to do that?
That's pretty much how I think I've only ever gutted one deer. I've always pulled the meat off the deer in the field. Let me see if I can find it somewhere. There is a video the department put out of Brian Clark doing the gutless method and pulling all the meat off.
Yeah, that was one of the videos I have with additional resources. It was the first one I talked about. The long one, they do the gutless method on that video.
And does he pull all the meat off in that video?
Mm-hmm. He works on one side till it's completely done, I think.
So, and whenever I go out in the field and hunt, I come back with just game bags full of meat. Like literally carry it out, leave the bones and everything. And then if it's a buck, the head, I'll take that with me too. But other than that, it all stays in the field.
How do you get those back straps out of there if you don't get them guts out of the way?
So there is a way to do the inner loins. I've never tried it, but I watched somebody else do it this last year, and I'm like, okay, now I got to try it. So ask me that again next year. But Becky, you've done it on an elk, haven't you?
I have. So they're such a soft muscle that there's where they begin, the ribs actually have ended. Sorry. So the ribs have stopped, and you can actually reach in from the outside. It's like a little pocket, and feel that muscle. You can use your thumb to separate it away from the spinal column. And then the only place that it's left attached is the very top, which you just can nick, and the very bottom. And you nick that and it pulls right out. The last video on the additional resources list is an elk quartering video that we did. And that's what Brent was referencing. That's where we did pull the inner loins out in that video.
Okay, I think I'm going to go the gut method, because if it's cold, that's a good way to warm up.
That's true. That's true.
I have a question.
Okay.
He said leave the bones and everything there. Besides Halloween decorations, what can you do if you are not in a area that, you know, Rumpke's going to think you mass murdered somebody if they see that in the can? I understand the birds will take care of that and other critters pretty quickly. But when you're talking hide and bones, and we've had a couple legs show up in the yard from the dogs, and
yeah.
What do you do that extra?
Great question. So one thing you might want to do is check your municipality, your area, what they might have some things. They might have a drop-off site for stuff like that, or they just might have a process for getting rid of that kind of stuff. I have never had any problems using dumpsters where I rent. So that they, you know, as long as it's bagged up, you don't want to not bag it up. So definitely bag it up and toss it like that. Or you can go all out. You can tan a hide. You can use the bones to make broth and stuff like that. You can boil them, and you can
Jewelry.
Do what?
Jewelry.
Make
jewelry. You'll cut up the little bones and make the jewelry.
Oh, jewelry. Yeah, you could definitely.
When I killed a doe, I think it was my doe, the local taxidermy guy asked for the cape. A lot of times when somebody has used a rifle, they hit it wrong, their cape's messed up, and he can use my cape to fix someone else's mount.
Yeah, so, that's cool that you said that.
Check with your local taxidermist. Plus, he gives you like a discount when you do kill something you want done.
Yeah, heck yeah. So funny you brought that up because that's exactly what happened to my first buck. We didn't know how to cut it, how to cape it out, so we cut it real close. And when I took it to the taxidermist, he said, well, that's not enough to work with, but I have this doe cape. And so that's exactly what happened for me. So yeah, cool. That's definitely a good idea.
Circling back to Laura's question, I also don't have a large vehicle. And I'm like, oh, well, you just make do with what you got. And of course, we've all seen the movies where they strap the deer to the front of the car. But in reality, would the heat from your motor actually have a negative effect on your deer meat if you traveled with it on the hood of your car?
Yes. Don't do that.
I love the movies.
Yes, the heat element. Also, as hunters, we're respecting the animal. We're respecting non-hunters. So if you have to strap your deer or put it in the bed, I recommend making sure that it's as inconspicuous as possible, just to avoid any negative feelings from other people that aren't at the stage that you're at, or a lot of people never think about hunting. They never consider it as a thing, a way of life, an option, a hobby, nothing. So the first impression, you don't want the first impression to be a bloody animal that they're just not prepared to see. That can sway them in the wrong direction. And even if we don't have a lot of hunters out there, we definitely want people to support it. It's how we manage our ecosystem. It's how we keep our herds healthy, is hunting. So the best light that we can present hunting in, the better. Tarp in the trunk. Megan Bagby hauled her deer to her processor in the trunk of her car in a tarp. Yes, it will work.
Do we know? I never did ask her after the fact. She even keeps a picture of the legs sticking out of the trunk.
About that far.
Framed in her office. But I never did ask her, Becky, did it stay clean in there? Do you know?
She said it worked pretty well. Yeah.
When I helped at the Hughes Market, we had a guy pull in his little Toyota car and opened up the trunk, and there's the dead deer.
Yep. I've seen it
drug
too.
It out, did it to it.
Yep. It'll work. I promise. I will say this. If you're using game bags or pillowcases, they will leak. They're very porous. It's just a fabric. So you still want your tarp to put under, or put a cooler or a tote. You don't even have to have a cooler if you're not going that far, and you can stop at the gas station that's 5 minutes down the road and put ice in a tote. You don't even have to buy a cooler.
And to expand a little bit on what Becky was talking about with making your deer inconspicuous, that goes for your neighborhoods too. So some of you all are probably like me and you live in a subdivision, and hanging a deer from a tree in a subdivision can turn non-hunters into anti-hunters very quickly, so as a hunter, it's our responsibility to make sure we don't turn non-hunters into anti-hunters. So being cognizant of your neighbors as well, it's something to be thinking of as well.
Yep. I'm right there with you, Brent. I live in a townhouse in the middle of Frankfurt, and we still processed a deer in our garage. You can hang him from the ceiling and get it done, but nobody else knew we were doing it. So that's the way you want to go. And you don't have to hang a deer to process it either. That's something else the videos show, is how to process it on the ground. So you don't have to worry about hoisting it up and not having the strength to get it in the air. Because I don't think I could do it alone, to be honest, if it was a big deer. Sometimes, you saw Katrina, if you were with us at the fire pit, Katrina's first deer was a 162-pound doe. It's going to be heavy to pick up on your own. So just do it on the ground. You totally got it. It's not really that much different.
I got a handy tripod in the garage.
It's not up for grabs, though. Yes, we bought an aluminum tripod. Super handy. Go ahead, Laura.
So if we get a deer and we process it and we want to put it in the freezer to have throughout the year, how big of a freezer would you need to keep everything?
Good question. We just have the smallest option deep freeze in our apartment that we use. And then Brent, I think you had an idea there. No?
Yeah, you said it. Yeah, I mean, I said, I pull all the meat off in the field, and you can fit an entire buck in a cooler. It doesn't have to be much.
Right.
If you're not having bone and stuff on there, once the meat's off, it's really flexible and compact, easy to put in Ziploc bags.
Yep. Good question.
When we process our meat, we grind most of it up to make like burger. So I always process those in a quart bag, about a pound, and we stack them up in my freezer and like a regular refrigerator. So I have a side by side, and we just stack those up in there, and you can probably get like 60 pounds of ground deer meat in your freezer without having to have like a separate deep freeze.
I've got the stand up, and it's a really kind of a big freezer, and we had 3 deer at one time in it and still had room. But my kid really likes deer meat, and we always take it somewhere and have it. We have the round steaks and, the sirloin tips and the roast and all that. But, we put 3 deer in ours.
Yeah,
And-
I would
and then-
say,
And then went on a hog hunt and filled it full of hog.
yeah, our deep freeze, our little one was real cheap from Walmart, probably like $150. And then to echo what Donna's saying, the big deep freezes that we have at mom and dad's they are going to hold 3 to 4 deer. So if you have time, the space, the investment, the money to invest. Jennifer, I think, did you have a question? I didn't know if you kept.
I was just going to say thank you for all of your knowledge. You've been very helpful.
Oh,
that
more than
whenever I've personally never killed a deer, I tend to just look at them. But I have stuff to do it. I just haven't done it yet. But like growing up, like you were saying when you were 11, whenever my dad would kill deer, I loved going out and helping him skin it. I don't know why. I guess I was just a weirdo kid, but I loved helping him skin those deer. And so whenever my husband or my boys kill a deer, I get excited just to have it hanging up in our carport so I can just start hacking at it.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I like her.
I also just cut I don't know what I'm cutting. I just cut in chunks and I ground everything up because we eat a lot of burger. So everything, the whole deer turns into a burger. We do try to save that back strap and we'll cook it separately, but the rest of it we just grind up. But you've been very helpful and thank you so much for all of your knowledge. This has been, I was concerned on how this was going to work with it being virtual, but I think you pulled it off. You did a great job.
Well, thanks, Jennifer. I'm glad
You're welcome. But I am going to.
I have another class, so
here.
I'm gonna leave.
Me too.
Yep, don't miss your class.
I think we could all do with a restroom break before the next class starts, right? Good job, Becky.
Yes, thanks
Great
again.
job.
Thank you all.
All right, I got it.
And then I have one more question.
Okay.
Some people mentioned that they were grinding their meat. I've heard that deer meat is really lean. Like if you grind it, do you have to add like fat to that, or can you just leave it as is?
That's an excellent question. So it totally depends on what you want to cook. We do add pork fat and sometimes beef fat if we can get a hold of it. Sometimes we don't go the extra mile to get the fat separate and we'll just buy a pack of bacon and grind the bacon up and do like a mixture with that. But you don't have to do it that way. You can, if you're going to do like a spaghetti and put meat in your spaghetti sauce, go straight deer. You don't have to add fat to it. If you're going to make burgers, that's when it comes in because it won't hold together without the fat very well. But I do know plenty of people that are very strict and purists, and they make it work and they make burgers out of pure deer.
A little tip on burgers with straight deer meat. Gonna sound crazy. Add oatmeal. Not the instant, but Mr. Quaker Oats oatmeal in the thing. Add a little of that. It's a binder and will help hold your burgers together.
Yeah. Great tip, Donna. Yeah. Good question, Laura.
I think I found one of the biggest when you all are bringing in the deer or any other animal, but the deer especially. When we're processing it at home, we wound up with what I call stew meat. We can put it in bags and you can use that for stews, for spaghettis, for anything, but you have a lot of that little chunk meat that when it goes to a processor, you don't get because they're taking it out in the whatever sections that they do. But we wound up with a lot of stew meat. So you have a lot more meat at your disposal than if it just, if it goes away. Sorry, Brent, you're leaving it in the field.
I still end up with a lot of stew meat, mostly because I hack the meat to pieces by accident, and it's like, oh, I guess that one's stew meat now too.
I can stay as long as you guys want to chat, or you're free to go too. If you have another class, don't miss it.
I think I have another class.
All right, Donna. Well, thanks for jumping on again.
Listen, it's been great. I might not have been sitting in the chair but I had to cook breakfast, but I was listening the whole time. It's been great. I can't tell you how much help this has been.
Well, thanks, Donna. I'm glad you feel that way. Take care.
Let's get out there and slay some deer.
Let's do it.
I'm there. Bye.
See ya.
This is my last class, but everything you guys have done this weekend has been really helpful, really educational for me, and I'm really glad I did this. So thank you guys very much.
Awesome, Laura. Well, I'm glad you got so much out of it. We hope to see you in some future classes too. Keep an eye out for Field to Fork stuff coming up.
I will. Thank you.